I've seen firsthand through a lot of my clients where when things go south and they have to evict their tenant, you have multiple people on a lease who get filed for eviction, and you're fighting this uphill battle of why am I being evicted if I paid my rent?
Able to say then what's the ideal way for a layout and to plan this and the ideal number of occupants?
Absolutely. So again, in Philadelphia, since we have no more than 3 unrelated, the most common type of co-living facility that we'll see in.
Welcome to the Philly Landlording Podcast, the only podcast that focuses entirely on landlording in the Philly metro area. And today we're going to be talking with a local architect about co-living. Co-living is basically renting out by the room, and there's many ways to do it. And there's many nuances and complexities about that topic. So we're going to get into all of the details, and Jesse, the architect that I'm talking to about it, is going to explain a lot of the nuances and what you need to know if you're interested in getting into this space. There's a lot to understand. It's not just taking any property and then renting it out by the room. You want to do it right. You want to do the design right. You have to take into a lot of considerations about how your tenants will manage with each other, and you want to make it as smooth as possible while also complying with local regulations. Like, did you know that more than 3 unrelated people cannot live together in the same property in Philadelphia? That's something I've known for a while, and I've never really understood how that could be in today's rental environment, where things like affordability are such an issue. Families are coming together to rent properties in order to deal with that. And then there's the trends that we all hear about of people, because they're working remote, move around from city to city, try out different things, and aren't necessarily looking for the traditional house that we all are familiar with. So they're more interested in flexible space and just renting rooms. So there's a lot of interesting things that you can do in this space, and we're going to get into that. And I hope you really enjoy the podcast. If you do find this useful and interesting, please make sure to like and comment so that more people get access to the information. It really helps us to keep this free and to keep it going. Thanks so much, and enjoy the episode. A lot of landlords think architects are just there to draw plans and get permits. But what if they're actually one of the major levers in whether a deal makes money or loses it? Today, I'm joined by Jesse Smith, founder and principal of JLS Architects. Jesse focuses on multifamily and mixed-use design, and he's worked on hundreds of units, including a significant number of co-living projects in markets like Philadelphia and Florida as well. So he's seen firsthand how these projects are designed, where they succeed and where they run into problems. But here's what caught my attention with Jesse. Jesse, you've designed all these co-living projects, but you don't invest in them yourself. Can you start by telling us a little bit why?
Absolutely, Cheryl. So number one, the education of the tenant is a really common misconception that a lot of landlords don't understand. And the people who live in a co-living property are typically considered occupants instead of a tenant. Collectively, they form one tenant. And so I've seen firsthand through a lot of my clients where when things go south and they have to evict their tenant, you have multiple people on a lease who get filed for eviction, and you're fighting this uphill battle of why am I being evicted if I paid my rent? And trying to educate your tenant and say, well, you're an occupant that's part of a tenant is something that's just an uphill battle to face. Number two, the property management and the leasing headaches are a little bit different than something like a traditional rental. You have to deal with the different lease language, again, putting multiple people on one lease who may not realize that they're actually on a lease with their co-living roommates. And there's more opportunities for a landlord to slip up and get themselves in trouble. The last reason is I've seen a lot of properties that are completely legal from a co-living standpoint, and they still get violations from L&I. And even though you're right, you're still fighting that uphill battle again with trying to explain to L&I and a judge that you're meeting all the correct legal obligations. And it's unnecessary time and money spent for something that you typically don't have in something like a single family or multifamily rental.
Okay, so those are really good points and considerations that any landlord needs to obviously take into consideration. What I was saying to you actually before we got onto the podcast was how like not every niche in the investment industry or market is for all of us. Some people prefer much less risky investments. Some people are willing to take the risks going into certain types of neighborhoods, certain types of properties. So what is it that you've been seeing attracts people to co-living? Like who are what are the clients that you're working with looking for when they get into co-living?
Yeah, so most of the clients I work with who are looking to invest in co-living properties see it as a high risk, high reward project. There's some people who see it as a low risk, high reward project. And I think that's the misconception that can get them into some hot water early on. There's really two different types of co-living. There's co-living by choice and co-living by necessity. And the two different markets play out for how you're designing it, how you're going to treat it as a landlord. And what we find out is landlords who understand what their target demographic is, the ones who say that I want to do co-living by choice. I want to provide an amenitized building. I'm going to charge premium rents, are different than those types of landlords and investors than the ones who say, I'm trying to provide co-living so that I can maximize my ROI in something like a row home.
So can you describe like a typical, if there is a typical project that you've worked on
Sure.
for co-living space? Yeah.
Absolutely. So a lot of our co-living clients typically will do something like, and we'll use the Philadelphia market as an example here. They'll do something like a 3-bed, 3-bath unit. And they'll put in, everybody gets their own bedroom. They might have access control locks on the doors. They all share one kitchen. There may or may not be a living space. There's no real formal living room where you can put a sofa and a TV. But often we give each one of the occupants their own ensuite bathroom. And there's some legal implications which we can get into of that circumvents the assumption that it may be a rooming house. But it also provides a opportunity to feature the bedroom as a 1-bedroom, 1-bath and get the rents as opposed to something like a traditional row home that might be 3 bedrooms, 1 bath.
So can you talk a little bit for that like 3-bedroom, 3-bath house? Can you talk a little bit about the zoning and what the legal implications are? And are people focusing more on the 3 beds because when you get up to 4, there's the issue of more than, I always forget. So more than 3 unrelated people can't live together?
Correct. So Philadelphia's zoning laws, and this is where co-living will differ from the building code, which I can also get into. But on a zoning level, Philadelphia, for example, says you can't have more than 3 unrelated people living together. And what that means is you can have 3 friends live together. You can have 3 friends and they each bring their wives, and now you have 6 people living together. You can have 3 friends and their wives and their kids, and those people can all live together, and there's still no more than 3 unrelated. But we've seen this issue where you have 3 unrelated people, and then someone says, "Hey, my boyfriend wants to move in," and you go, "Well, that's now going to be an issue. That's now a 4th unrelated person. If they're not related to someone who's on the lease, you're in violation of the Philadelphia zoning under the definition of a family." And we found different ways to kind of skirt this issue and play with the gray area of what actually constitutes a family and what actually constitutes a dwelling unit. The main statement we typically say is it's usually 1 family per kitchen. And so if you have 1 kitchen in the property, and a kitchen is then further defined as having permanent provisions for cooking, which the way L&I interprets that in Philadelphia is, do you have a stove or an oven? And a stove or an oven is going to, or a range or an oven is going to count as a kitchen. And what we've seen people get in trouble with is they try to create these micro units or suites where they'll add another kitchen into it. And that's an easy opportunity for L&I to come in and say, hey, this is zoned single family, but you're treating it as a duplex. Now that you're treating it as a duplex, you need to have 2 rental licenses. You need to have the zoning for that. And now you're fighting an uphill battle to try to get zoning for a property that likely isn't zoned for it.
Okay, that's very interesting. So is there so there is there a formal definition then of what a multifamily is? Is a multifamily any property that has two kitchens?
There's not a formal, I mean, there's a definition that says if you have more than one family, you're multifamily. And Philadelphia and a lot of other jurisdictions break it out where they usually say single family, two family, or multifamily. The reason they do that is two family can fall under a different building code definition under the International Residential Code as opposed to the International Building Code, but that's more of a semantics thing. Uh, as soon as you start putting in more people than what constitutes a family, it becomes a multifamily property. And if the property isn't zoned for multifamily, you're in a zoning violation. And that's where we've seen a lot of these co-living properties get hung up, is a 3-bedroom facility. Now, we've also done situations where someone's bought a larger brownstone home and they said it's zoned single family. I could try to go through a variance process and get it pushed as a duplex or triplex, but the neighborhood RCO is going to go against me and the zoning hearing board is going to go against me. So how do I maximize this really large property without creating a bunch of 8-bedroom units, for example? And one of the ways we've worked around that is by creating co-living suites. And the best way I can describe it is almost like a dorm room. So it might be you, me, and one other person are collectively on one lease. Collectively, we are the tenant. Individually, we are the occupants. You may want a second bedroom, and I may want a second bedroom, but we're not going out and individually finding our own 2-bedroom apartments. So what we did is we created a 6-bedroom, 3-bathroom house. And the way the layout works is there's a private door that takes you to a hallway, similar to how like a triplex would be set up where each level might be an apartment. But maybe the first floor is your apartment. You have a key to that door, you open it up, there's a bathroom, there's 2 bedrooms. It's really acts as your space. Maybe I have the second floor, someone else has the third floor. But when it's time to actually cook, there's a shared kitchen that's down on the first floor where we all go to cook. And that might be a nicer kitchen than what you would find in a typical 1-bed or 2-bed apartment. The catch is you have to understand the market and say, is this a neighborhood where people are going to be cooking all the time? Down in Florida, when we were designing some of these, we had, they have different zoning laws. They're allowed in certain municipalities to have up to 8 unrelated. And we would put 8 people in one dwelling unit, and it counts as one dwelling unit, single family. That kitchen looks a lot different than a North Philadelphia row home. In the Florida example, it was a giant show kitchen. It had a really nice commercial type range. It had, I think, 3 refrigerators because they understood that 8 people can't really share one refrigerator. And it still works as a single family co-living, but at a different scale.
So do you get any insights into what goes on after you've designed these properties and what happens once people actually move in?
We do.
About sharing that kitchen.
We do. And sometimes we've had clients who say it works really well. And that's just something that they have to explain to their occupants when they're signing up for a lease. They pitch it maybe online as sort of a room rental, but when you're actually signing a lease, they say, hey, it's a co-living property. You're going to be on a lease with people that you don't necessarily know. You should understand the risks and obligations of doing so. Most people don't think through it. They see it as an $800 or $900 1-bed apartment with a shared kitchen. They don't understand how that eviction process would ever work. They don't understand the ramifications of being on a lease with people they've never met. But the feedback we get really depends on the operator. We've had different operators say that their occupants really like that. We have one client who pushed it a little bit further to the extreme and said, I want to start giving them kitchenettes in each of their bedrooms. And he said, what's the definition of a kitchen and how do I play with that gray area to do the maximum co-living feel while still being compliant? And what we did is in every bedroom, it almost felt like its own studio apartment or like a glorified extended stay hotel room. There was a kitchenette in the corner. There was a spot to plug in a hot plate if you wanted to. There was a microwave. You had a sink. On some of the properties, we put in dishwashers. It felt like a studio apartment, but by the legal definition, they had a shared kitchen and it constituted single family.
And they are, so there's one lease, but they're obviously not all going to be moving in on the same day. There's all kinds of things that are complex. Are you involved at all in figuring out the lease?
I'm typically not involved in figuring out the lease. And this is why it's one of these issues where even experienced real estate attorneys don't fully grasp and understand how these types of leases need to be set up. You treat it like a room rental, but on paper and in legality, it is a co-living property. And one of the ways you do that is when someone wants to move out, you allow them to move out, and you as the landlord takes the hit until you reoccupy that room. So working through those lease negotiations, where if you have, for easy math, we'll say 3 people each paying $500, when one person moves out, you revise the lease and say now your rent dropped from 1,500 to 1,000. And when another person moves in, you say now your rent's going up. So the legality of that is quite different. You can also, in Philly, I think you have to charge the same amount of rent, but you're allowed to give credits or kind of write-off number. And that's where it gets a little bit above my pay grade.
Yo, Philly landlords, just wanted to ask you for a moment of your time. First of all, I just really want to thank you for listening to the Real Landlording podcast, the only podcast dedicated to landlording issues in the Philadelphia metro area. And to help support me in being able to continue to provide that free content and invite the amazing guests that we are able to have, all I need you to do is like, comment, share with colleagues and friends who you think also might benefit from the content. That really helps me in my efforts to keep this free and to keep it coming. And I really appreciate the comments and getting the feedback and hearing what you like, what you don't like, and even ideas, of what you would like to see coming down the line. Also, I just want to remind you that we have lots and lots of free resources and information that will help you at any time in your journey of being a landlord at reallandlording.com. And we also have the Find a Pro resource where you can find tradespeople, contractors, service providers for virtually anything that you need as a landlord in the Philadelphia area. So please make use of that and let me know any feedback you have. I really, really appreciate it. I love doing this. Thanks. Okay, it does sound complicated. And what about, I know, there's platforms out there that have been built in order to allow owners to actually implement these more, complex living situations. The one that I know about is Pad Split. So are you familiar with it? And have you seen people using that?
I've seen people using it. My take on Pad Split might not be the most opportunistic. Their platform relies on calling it a membership instead of a lease. But that's really to cover their butts. It doesn't actually work in the legal court of law. The way that Philadelphia reads is if you have more than 3 unrelated people living together. It doesn't say if you have 3 memberships. It doesn't say it says if you have more than 3 unrelated people living together, that's a violation of single family. And the Pad Split model works for a lot of people. Personally, a lot of our clients have used it. They'll even use it to put more than 3 unrelated people living together. We have one property right now where I think they have 8 or 9, bedrooms. My assumption is they're going to try to rent out each one of those on Pad Split. And it's very likely to get caught. And the Pad Split model is they'll pull it out. They'll say, okay, now you're compliant. And they kind of kick that can down the road and make it someone else's problem.
Okay. It's an interesting situation because I think if I recall correctly, there is a move to change the legislation so that more than 3 people can live in the same unit together. And that's just, I assume, a pressure that's on the city and in general across the country. People are having a hard time with affordability. So the idea, actually, it always seemed quite archaic to me to talk about the fact that only three, more you can't have more than three unrelated people living together, and it's an invasion of privacy. Like, are you related? How are you related? All of that. It's always been interesting. But I think we are going to start to see, the whole situation with the boarding houses or whatever you call them. It's also interesting how these things get marketed, like the rebranding as co-living, which sounds kind of cool, right?
Yeah, a lot of it becomes a marketing strategy. And you brought up an interesting point. I mean, Pennsylvania has some of the most antiquated, they're really actually based in old brothel laws that don't allow you to have more than three unrelated people living together. The way these laws were written is as soon as you would have that fourth person, they said, hey, it feels like a brothel. But the times are changing. You have a lot of people living together who aren't related. When my wife and I first moved in together up in Cheltenham Township, we were actually in violation of a local zoning ordinance because Cheltenham Township doesn't allow more than one unrelated person. And that's crazy. That's just not how families function in 2026. So a lot of these laws are looking to be overwritten. Almost every time, if the landlord actually takes it and appeals it through an appellate or to the state Supreme Court, every single time they get sided with and they say this is correct. It's creating additional laws that are making it harder for both families and landlords to rent out properties, but it's still something they keep in place as a deterrent to have, so you don't have 10 people living under one house.
Right. So yeah, so it's on the side of the renters, it's being, I think, looked at more because of the affordability issue. And then on the side of investors, it's something that people are very interested in because people are looking away to pivot away in many instances from the long-term rentals in Philadelphia, which has been the victim of a lot of difficult legislation, and there's maybe some increase in vacancies in the city. So people are looking for different models, whether there's Airbnb, there's the midterm rentals, there's all kinds of things. There's sober living houses. There's so many different things that you can do with properties, but we're all very limited by the various legislation. It's even neighborhood by neighborhood, right? So, one council, or I don't know how it's called, like the districts that each council person is responsible for, they can have their own unique laws. So are there neighborhoods that are more popular for this model?
There used to be certain neighborhoods where you either tried to stay away from, or Brewery Town and Strawberry Mansion was a tougher neighborhood. It was a neighborhood where as soon as you put three unrelated people living together, the neighbors were calling L&I and saying, I think I'm living next to a rooming house, come check it out. And that just opens a can of worms. And as anybody knows, if L&I is really digging, they'll find some type of violation. And so the neighbors have really had a big push as to where these types of properties can and can't exist. North Philadelphia, especially Northeast Philadelphia, we see more of this. I'm not totally sure why, but we've seen a big push into North and Northeast Philly, and it's now working its way down into South Philly.
Okay. So what would you say is the biggest mistake that owners are making when they get into the co-living space, whether they're coming to you or not, or not?
I think one of the biggest mistakes that a lot of landlords make is not really understanding the nuances of co-living. We talked about how it's one lease and you have to have the different occupants on one lease. And I've just heard a lot of landlords say, yeah, well, that's fine, we'll handle it. And we go, but have you done that before? And they go, I've been a landlord before. How hard can it be? And I think the other big detriment that landlords face is the forgetting to take a step back And remember that as a landlord, they're actually here to provide a service. They're not here just to throw a bunch of bedrooms into something like a pad split model and say, wow, I'm renting every bedroom for $1,000 a month and I'm generating $12,000 a month gross profit. And wow, it's a cash cow. You go, well, yes, you put 12 bedrooms in a house, every bedroom is 70 square feet. Who's actually renting that? And the problem we've seen is they forget that they're here to provide a service for an end user. And if the end user doesn't like their property, they'll move elsewhere. And so they complain about vacancies for a misconception that the vacancy issue is possibly related to co-living and not the reality that it may be about the product they're offering.
Interesting. Okay. So that I want to pivot here a little bit and talk more about, like, in general, you as an architect, and like I said in the beginning, people I think have some misconception of what the role of an architect can and should be, and how an architect can bring a lot of value that some people are not looking for, or don't know that they could look for. So you're talking about the experience of the renter. So what are some of the design choices that attract better tenants? Because I think we all are interested in trying to improve the types of tenants that we attract, whatever neighborhood or type of property we have.
Yeah, absolutely. So some of the easy ways you can do that are by providing really nice shared kitchens. We talked about that example in Florida where they gave 3 refrigerators, and three refrigerators for 8 people just felt like the appropriate number, and they get used appropriately. Um, and that was a change from that client's previous project where they built it, where they provided a mini fridge in everyone's bedroom. And the complaints they got were, I ordered a pizza. I can't fit my pizza box in my mini fridge. And so they're going and everyone's storing it in the main fridge, and the main fridge gets too packed. So something as simple as just understanding that multiple people have different types of needs or an expansion of needs. We've also seen that where one of our clients decided to put a in-unit laundry in every single bedroom. And they said, it really doesn't cost me much more in the scheme of things. But what it does is it offers this sense of private laundry. It's your washer and dryer. And now it's nice because when a washer or dryer breaks, I don't have to try to figure out who broke it. I know who broke it. It's in their bedroom. Those little types of things, you can start talking about other amenities. And in one of the properties we're working with right now, they have, it's outside of Pennsylvania, but I think they have 6 or 8 bedrooms in there. And they're providing like a small fitness gym as an amenity for the residents the occupants who form the tenant in that building.
That's interesting because it comes up a lot, the issue of amenities and the abundance of new multifamily complexes around, especially in Philadelphia, that are trying to fill up their units. Besides the giving free month's rent or even more than that, and then they have all of the amenities like what are the popular ones? Dog parks, dog spas, the gyms, meeting rooms, and all of that. And the small investor that has obviously single family or even small multifamily buildings doesn't really can't really do those amenities, but you can get creative. So when you work with investor clients, what are some of the things aside from the typical things that we're all thinking about that our architects do for us? What are some of the added value services that you can provide?
Yeah, it's a great question. So really where myself and other architects come into play is we're providing a tangible value that usually is helping you understand something new about the property. And an example I love to give is we had a client a few years back who actually inherited a property from her father who passed away. And this was in like north central Philadelphia. And it was zoned RM1. She could do a duplex by right. And she had some real estate mentors. She had her lender who were telling her, hey, you really want to put 2-bedroom units in this thing because legally you can put 2 2-bedroom units in. So it was a top bottom corner property duplex. And we were engaged as the architect, and we told her and said, this, you can do that. Everyone's telling you can. You could put two-bedroom units, or, and hear me out, you could do two one-bedroom units. The bedrooms are going to be much bigger. The living room space is going to be nicer. And at the end of the day, you're still doing it as Section 8. That was her target all along. So you're still treating it as a Section 8 property. What are you really sacrificing if you go from a two-bedroom to a one-bedroom? And her real estate mentors and her lender were saying, oh, this is an extra $200 a month or $150 a month you're leaving on the table times 12 months a year. And they're running these hypothetical numbers. And hypothetical numbers are exactly that. They're hypothetical. And so we gave her a floor plan that said, this is how you can fit a two-bedroom unit in here. And each bedroom was very small. They were less than 80 square feet. They each fit a twin bed. And again, her lender and her real estate mentors were saying, this is great. You can rent it for this. You can do this. You can do this. And we said, time out. Or run the number based on the assumption of a one-bedroom unit. And she ran that assumption and went, yeah, it's a little bit less in rent. And, but the upside is it's going to be the nicest one-bedroom unit in that neighborhood. And so what she ended up doing is she built it as two one-bedroom units. They rented immediately because it was the nicest one-bedroom unit in the neighborhood. And now she has a long-term tenant that never wants to leave. They have this beautiful bedroom. They have this beautiful living space. And yeah, she's passing up on the extra possibly $300 a month, possibly, $3,600 a year in additional gross income. But she doesn't have a tenant that's leaving every 12 months. She has a tenant that takes care of the property. And that difference in the approach has made her realize that it's not always just a numbers game. There's that practical application of, again, who's living here and who's going to be my tenant.
Right. And no kids.
And no kids. And, I don't know if she allows pets. I don't know what her lease language says, but it's the nicest property within a 2-block radius. And if anybody moves out, someone else will immediately move in and take pretty good care of it.
So do you have clients who will come to you not only with, say, new construction or a full gut? Is there any other stage in a project that you can bring some value to a client?
Absolutely. I mean, it also depends on the sense of scale, and it depends on what the client's budget is. If you're not planning to do actual construction, we might not really have a place to be involved there. And if you're opposed to new ideas, you may not want to be talking to an architect. One of the most famous examples is everyone's heard of or possibly even visited Falling Water, the famous Frank Lloyd Wright house out in Western PA. And that was a project where the owners of the property, the Kaufmans, wanted a house on the other side of the river that looked at, or on the other side of the creek that looked at the waterfall. And their architect came in, Frank Lloyd Wright, and said, no, I'm going to put the house right on top of the waterfall and you're going to like it. And it was very contrarian to what they were requesting, but the rest is history. Everyone knows of the property. It's been in a lot of famous case studies. And I'm not saying every architect is going to say, no, you're wrong, and try to force something different down your throat, but it's the opportunity to hear something of I wasn't thinking about doing that. Explain to me why that might work. And with our client in the 2-bed versus 1-bed example, it was her taking a risk and understanding that there was a reason we were proposing something for her. It wasn't because it was slightly less ARV. It was because it had a long-term benefit, and that's the game she was in for.
So that's a really valuable point of view, and that you really need to take with a grain of salt, like what I don't know what to call them, gurus are selling us on, and the things that get passed around the internet and social media constantly. And one of the things that I believe is that tenants don't leave units; they leave the experience that they're having in the unit. But it's hard. Like the Philadelphia housing stock is all very similar, right? I mean, it depends on the neighborhood, and I think the average person is not too creative, or they've been sold this idea of try to get as much out of the unit as you can, maximize the income. And this is the way to maximize the income, like with bedrooms, like with the way that they do the rehab, the types of materials they use and things like that. And you go into so many of the rentals in Philadelphia, and you have you wouldn't know where you are without someone telling you, because they all start to look the same, right? The same floors, the same countertops, the row homes that have been around for 100 years that obviously have the limitations that they have.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it varies location to location, but there's some recurring themes. Bedroom space is always important. And when you get into this co-living model of people trying to pack bedrooms into a house, you get a lot of these like code minimum 70 square foot bedrooms with a twin bed. And I wouldn't want to live in that. You probably wouldn't want to live in that. So why are we forcing, our occupants and tenants to try to want to live in that? The other things you can do are look at and say, what are some of the other big complaints? Common area, we'll call it common area maintenance, even like a single family home for something like co-living, where or do you maybe have a cleaning service you offer that cleans the kitchens and the common spaces? Is it something where everyone has their own bathroom, where you're not waiting for your roommate to get out of the shower every day? And you can take that and even go to a more multifamily type extreme, where on a lot of our co-living properties, we're saying, hey, we're going to put sound insulation in all the walls. It's not just a 2x4 wall with drywall. We're going to actually put in sound bats. And the investors hear that and go, yeah, that just sounds like dollar signs. We go, right, but for the little bit of extra of you putting sound insulation in a wall today, you now have two people who are going to share a wall between their bedrooms and never know the other person exists. So we treat it a little bit more like a multifamily. Sometimes that might be things like fire ratings or sound ratings, especially in multifamily properties, which most of Philadelphia is. We put sound ratings between the floors. You don't want the person upstairs stomping around on their LVT and you hear it down on the first floor. So those little types of things make a really big improvement, but it's something that gets overlooked because it doesn't immediately factor into that end ROI number that most investors are thinking.
That is like so true. And you touched a nerve, because I literally have one of my kids is moving out and can't move out fast enough from a place that she rented a year ago with her husband, where I think they thought they were getting a top unit and they ended up getting a bottom unit, and they're going crazy from the noise above. And this is a big multifamily that was probably built in the 70s or 80s. And I guess they didn't pay attention to stuff like that. But it's not only that it's a bad experience for the tenant, but over time, I think those types of properties, well, they have to lower their rent, and they tend to then attract tenants that are not the best, who don't have other choices. But anybody who has a choice is going to leave when they have a bad experience, right?
That's exactly it. Another thing I didn't really hit on yet, but becomes more important for something like co-living, is individualized HVAC. A lot of these older properties are either like radiators, or it might be window units for the AC. And I don't enjoy that. You probably don't enjoy that. So when we have our clients and our investors who are going in and doing some type of level of renovation, I often push for them to consider individualized HVAC. Something like ductless mini splits, for example, where every bedroom has their own. You can turn it on and turn it off. Maybe PTAC units, maybe VTAC units, but something that allows that person to feel like they're in control. And that's where a lot of that respect comes from, is if you're respecting your tenants and giving them the opportunities to take care of a place and have their own HVAC and have their own bathroom and have their own laundry, why would they move out?
Right. I think, these are really great tips. And it's actually, I think one of the problems that a lot of owners face, because they're small, either they only have one property or just, a few properties, so they don't have their network of reliable, whether it's contractors, consultants, architects, all of those people that make up the team, that they're trying to even figure out who should I trust to tell me, to guide me in what to do? Like you mentioned, mini splits, and that can be, it's still a relatively new technology in the United States, not in the rest of the world, but people don't understand it, and they don't know what they need to do. I see it all the time in making decisions. Everything about HVAC seems to be a complex decision when you're dealing with old housing stock. So that's a good one. So I move to some kind of like practical questions, because I want to take advantage of your knowledge and share it with the audience. Some of your thoughts on converting single family to multi in Philadelphia.
Yeah. Do you have like a scale in mind, or just as a broad statement, like single family to duplex, or?
So you walk into if someone has a single family house, let's say it's four beds, it's only got one bath now, and the zoning does allow for multifamily. What is it that you look for to decide whether it makes any sense and doable?
Yeah, so I think we're a little unique. I try to figure out what our client's investment strategy is first. Is this something they're trying to flip and sell? Is this something they're trying to do a long-term hold and be the landlord? Or are they just trying to get it entitled and then sell it to a different developer who actually is going to be the end user? Once we have a better understanding of that, we'll usually look at what does the space currently allow and what does the space allow for provisions of. And what you talked about, something like maybe a 4-bed, 1-bath row home. If it's 2 stories, we're usually going, you could probably fit a duplex in here if it's allowed. There's other triggers that happen in Philadelphia once you have 3 or more units. Now you're talking a sprinkler system. Now you're talking a requirement for mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and fire alarm drawings, things that may add expense that may not cover their own cost. And I have this question, this conversation with a lot of new clients where they say, I bought a big property, it's zoned, I can put a triplex in, what's your price for a triplex? And I go, well, before we do that, why are you trying to put a triplex in? And they go, oh, it's going to be great. The ARV of a triplex in this neighborhood is like $900,000 and we can make this work. And I go, yeah, but what's your long-term goal? Do you understand all the things you're going to have to put into the building to get to that 900 number? And when we explain it, they sometimes scratch their heads and go like, geez, I don't know if the squeeze is worth the juice there. Why am I going to do that? And we go, have you considered doing it as a duplex? Have you considered, if you're already going to be putting in mechanical, electrical, and plumbing and fire alarm drawings and hiring an engineer to do that, have you considered possibly going to a 4-unit building? Is it allowed? Do you need a variance? And everyone gets scared of variances in Philadelphia, and I don't want to deal with that. And we go, yeah, but sometimes that's just the necessary evil for your project. Getting that 4th unit might push you to an ARV that is crazy. Maybe now you're talking about building out the back of the building and actually creating more square footage. But if you want to keep it simple, you're probably doing a top-bottom duplex, 1 or 2 bedroom units, depending what space allows. And it's an easy in, easy out.
So that leads me to the next question of, so what are some of the most common mistakes that you're seeing less experienced owners make in Philly?
I think it goes back to not understanding who their target demographic is. And a lot of these real estate mentors that are out there online right now are telling you, my property, my single family home in Philly or my duplex in Philly appraised at 1.4 million. It's like, that's great. Congratulations that it appraised at that. Assuming you're going to take out a 75% refinance, assuming that now you have to have the tenants cover that debt, do they? And if they don't, it falls apart. It's this house of cards that's relying on imaginary numbers. And that's when a lot of these people go bankrupt or sell it for a lot less than they put into it. And it's a shame because they didn't have good information going into their project. I think if they understand who those end users are and you say, hey, this is a zip code where I'm going to Section 8 it and I know what I'm going to get, or I'm going to do market rate and this is what I think I can get. and you work the numbers backwards, you do an actual pro forma, and make sure that this thing at least pencils on paper with realistic numbers, not the made up inflated ARV numbers, you're at least off to a better start of understanding where you'll be in a few months when construction is done.
So this is, I think this is really important for people to understand, and a great added value that you have actually obviously bring to the table. And I'm thinking of like a particular example of someone who recently was asking about a couple of properties that they inherited. And so I guess they don't know much about investing, and they just made a bunch of assumptions and thinking, okay, I have these two houses, I'll make them into duplexes. You know, they probably listen to a couple of podcasts, that kind of thing. So can someone like that come to you for a consultation where you would come look at the properties and help them figure out what to do? Like this particular person was already jumping to bringing in a contractor, for example. And it's like, whoa, you don't know anything yet. Take a step back.
Yeah, I hear that all too often is people like go to contractors as their first step, and contractors are a necessary part of the project. But contractors usually shouldn't be your first step. You know, that's like going to a car salesman and asking what's wrong with my car. The answer is, well, everything's wrong with your car. You got to buy a new car. You go to a mechanic, right? You're going to someone who can help you identify and then fix a problem. If in the example you gave where that person inherited two properties, you know, what is their strategy? One of their strategies might be, look, I inherited it. I'm going to sell off the properties, collect my money, and move on. And that's okay if that's their strategy. But if that's not their strategy, they need to assemble the right team. They need to understand who's going to help them understand the permitting side of it, help them get the necessary drawings, who's going to actually build it, who's going to oversee the building of it. Are they a local investor where they're going to pop in to check on construction, or are they going to take the contractor at his word? And it's those types of kind of, I'll call it like a team building exercise where you're building your team, you're getting the team all on the same page, is just how the process really needs to start. And yeah, we offer those kind of consultation services. A lot of them truthfully can happen remotely now, you know, especially in the city of Philadelphia with something like Atlas, which I'm sure most people listening to are familiar with. You can go on Atlas, see the property size, typically get a copy of the deed. You can see what the zoning is, and you can pretty quickly understand what the property can offer. If it's a little bit more complex than that, yeah, we'll go out to the site, we'll meet with clients, we'll talk about, oh, we didn't realize this, or, you know, could you send us photos or videos of this or that? There's a lot of different ways we can handle that. We're really here to just be that team player and the quarterback to make sure you're going in the right direction.
So this is great information. I guarantee you, Jesse, most people don't think of an architect as someone who can give this type of information and insights, and that it will end up either saving them a bunch of money, saving them on headaches, or sending them in the right direction. And this is very much, you know, what I'm trying to do at Real Landlording, trying to help people implement best practices and find the ways to make the best decisions at every point where they have a decision to make, which is throughout your ownership, right? Like you're constantly making decisions. So I'm really glad that we had this chance to talk about like the co-living and the different ways that people can maximize their properties and how to make those decisions about whether that's the right direction, and to learn a bit more about what architects do, because I didn't even think about some of these things. So can you share like how people can reach out to you, how they can get in touch with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple different ways. Usually the easiest way is to visit our website, so jlsarchitects.com, and you can go to our contact page and submit a request there. Alternatively, email us directly. The email is general, the word general, GENERAL, at jlsarchitects.com. Or we're always just a phone call or text message away, and that number is 484-809-9151, and one of our architects is usually able to respond within 24 hours. So we're here to really be a resource, make sure that landlords get educated on what they can and should do. I think one of the things I often hear is when someone's talking to a landlord, and I'll hear it in passing, they say like, hey, does anyone have an architect recommendation? And someone else will chime in and say, yeah, I got this drafter. And I go, well, hold on. A drafter is great if you're looking for someone to draft something, but what you might be looking for is someone to come in with a different viewpoint and understand your situation and get you to cross whatever your finish line looks like.
Okay, that was a great summing up, and definitely true, because I probably made that mistake myself. So if you're listening and you enjoyed this podcast and you got some good information, please like, subscribe, comment, whatever platform you're listening on. Help us get the word out. Help me continue to be able to provide this great content. Visit reallandlording.com and see a lot more content and resources that you can use, similar to the types of information that Jesse shared with us today. And thanks so much for joining us, and subscribe so that you can hear the next podcast as well.
Feeling lost? Let reallandlording.com navigate your rental business.